I'm so excited to have Jim Buchanan with us now from Cadient Talent to talk to us a little bit about something really important, which is mitigating bias in the hiring process and leveraging technology to do so. Jim, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Zaneeb. And glad to be with everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. As Zaneeb said, we're going to talk about using augmented intelligence to mitigate bias in the hiring process. You may wonder, why do we talk about augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence, which you hear more frequently? We believe that in the hiring process, you can't completely replace the human factor of hiring. So we like to augment that intelligence that you have in your hiring managers and provide some additional assistance rather than replacing what they do today. So in our time together today, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the hiring process, talk a little bit about the characteristics of a quality hire, how we define that, how you would go about achieving a quality hire. With augmented intelligence, we want to talk about how do you create a candidate prediction model that's based on machine learning and algorithms and augment your intelligence of your hiring managers, but do it in a way that avoids bias. So we have to avoid intentional bias. We also have to avoid unintentional bias in human practice, also with machine learning. We'll talk a little bit about how some unintentional bias and potential for discrimination can creep into the processing of hiring. And also we'll talk about how data-driven hiring decisions help to mitigate bias and improve diversity of the workforce. So what is a quality hire anyway? It's a term that is talked about frequently in our industry. Everybody wants a quality hire, but it's sometimes difficult to define exactly what that means. But the way that we define it at Cadient Talent is that we look at both pre-hire data and post-hire data to determine what constitutes a quality hire. So with a pre-hire data is all about the candidates that you have, and there's a lot of candidate data in different systems and probably within your organization. So within that candidate data, we look at things like skills, knowledge, what's the past record of performance and experience. We've even probably done some pre-employment assessments to determine whether a person's going to be a good fit. But you can take all that information and you make a decision based on that information, and you're trying to predict, is that person going to be a quality hire? A really important aspect of that is to match up that pre-hire data with post-hire data. Who in your organization has been a good performer? Who has stayed on the job for a long period of time? Who has received good performance ratings? Who has advanced in their job, maybe gotten promotions or taken on additional responsibilities? That is the quality hire that you're looking for. So the question is, how do you take that candidate data and figure out which candidates are going to become those good employees after you make the hiring decision? You don't want it to be a coin flip as to whether the person is going to work out or not. You want to supplement the information that the hiring manager has through machine learning and algorithms to figure out which of those candidates have the best chance to become a good employee. What's happening in our industry today, what we see frequently is, and you'll hear this term, recruitment process automation. What that means generally is that people are trying to make the recruiting process more efficient. We're trying to automate how you've hired in the past. At Cadient Talent, we deal with a lot of what we call distributed hourly hiring clients. And those are businesses that have a high contingent of hourly employees within their workforce. They're working at remote locations. You have hiring managers, local hiring managers who are making hiring decisions. And we often see that people in those businesses, in those industries, they tend to experience very high turnover. And it is not good for the business to hire people who simply continue to turn over. So we don't want to automate that process. If you're hiring people today and they're turning over at a rapid rate, what good is it to automate that? When you bring in post-hire data, now you have the opportunity to evaluate candidates based on real data that made a difference in those people who became successful employees. That's optimizing your recruiting process, not simply automating it. That's how you get to a quality hire. Within that model, as a picture of the model, we take historical applicant data, we take historical employee data, we combine it, we analyze it using machine learning algorithms, and we create a prediction model as to whether that particular candidate is going to become a valuable employee. Are they going to be a quality hire? In that combination and analysis, there are hundreds of variables that go into the analysis. And when a candidate completes an application at your business, you generally get about 100 pieces of data from that. You also get data that is derived from that. For example, if I'm applying for a position at a store, you're going to get my address, you're going to have the address of the store, and we're going to calculate what's the distance between your residence and the store location. What's the driving time between that resident and that location? And that could be a factor in whether that person is going to be a successful employee or not. So there's a lot of data that you're capturing, well over 100 when you take derived data into account. However, not all of that data is useful, and not all of that data is acceptable to use in the model. If we're capturing names, we're capturing gender, we're capturing ethnicity, we're capturing age, you can't use any of that data. You don't want to use any of that data in your model. So all of that has to be excluded. And we'll talk in a minute about how a model, a process like this has to be managed, because there is the potential for unintentional bias to creep into your model and cause disparate impact to your workforce. You have to be very vigilant to make sure that doesn't happen. We'll talk about how to do that in a second. So how do you mitigate that intentional and unintentional bias? Well, the first thing that you do is you start with the end in mind. You have a goal, likely, that you want a diverse workforce. And that is important to your business because many studies have shown that diverse workforces are more productive than workforces that are less diverse. That's the environment that you want. So then you have to understand the different biases that can creep into this. We've talked about some of these, like age or ethnicity or gender or disability status. Some of those things are just legally have to be excluded from your decision process, and it's the right business decision to make to exclude it from those decisions that we make and the analysis that we do. But there are these unintentional things that can creep in. For example, you might say, well, in my business, I think that home ownership is a variable that would be a predictor as to whether this person is going to be a good employee or not. That can be biased. That can be unintentional bias because it might be that certain ethnic groups don't enjoy home ownership at the same rate that other ethnic groups do. That has to be analyzed. It has to be evaluated as to whether that's a proper variable to include. It's a process of vigilance, and you have to analyze it. You have to think about not the intentional bias. Those are easy to exclude. It's the unintentional bias that requires a great deal of vigilance to make sure that nothing is creeping into our model that is going to create this unintended bias that we're trying to avoid. So as we work through processes like this, we review the results, we make sure that we're not getting any kind of unintended consequences from unintentional bias. We review the results, we improve the results. That's the way machine learning works anyway. Machine learning is a process that you have an algorithm that trains on a set of data, and then over time, as you get additional data, the algorithms become more and more predictive, and the algorithms will do a great job of telling you these are the candidates that we think will turn out to be quality hires, and you can start to rely on those recommendations that, not totally, but you can start to say, if your hiring manager is looking to hire a person for a position, the proper machine learning algorithms can say these are the top 5 candidates for that position. And you can rely on the fact that the bias has been mitigated by that process, both intentional and unintentional. And machine learning, artificial intelligence is a relatively new area. A lot of people are afraid of it. You may be afraid that it's going to introduce bias into the system. And we've all heard stories about various companies that have started an artificial intelligence program, particularly in the area of recruiting, and it produced a result that they did not want because the information was biased in the beginning, or something went wrong in the process and created a bias. I would argue that a properly designed candidate model through machine learning that is intentionally reducing bias, it's not something that just happens. You have to begin with the end in mind to say, I'm going to eliminate that, and there has to be an action plan to eliminate bias, which can be programmed into the machine learning algorithm. It's going to produce a better result than your human hiring manager. I spoke to a person a few days ago who was responsible for hiring at different locations for a convenience store. This person told me that I prefer hiring people that are in their 40s and 50s because they're easier to manage. They're more reliable, they're more dependable. That's bias, okay? You can't do that. And so with a machine learning, a properly designed machine learning algorithm, you don't even take that into account. You don't take age into account, but you're looking for all of those things that are related to job performance, that are specific to job performance. That's what we want to find in the candidate that will turn out to be a quality hire. So imagine a different way to hire. Our vision statement at Cadient Talent is that we want to revolutionize the way the world makes hiring decisions. Because especially for hourly hiring, which is where we specialize, I think the process is broken today, or it definitely needs improvement. If it didn't need improvement, you wouldn't see such high turnover rates within hourly employees. Hourly turnover tends to be about 5 times higher than salary turnover. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that, but some of the reason is that we sometimes find it difficult to assess candidates properly. We have clients who may get several hundred candidates for every person that they hire. your local hiring manager is not going to go through several hundred candidates and do a proper assessment of all of those. So what we provide is an automated way to assess those candidates through the application process, using assessments. In the hourly world, availability is an important factor. You're trying to hire for a particular shift, and you need a candidate who is willing to and able to work that particular shift. So all of those factors go into a recommendation engine, along with all of the machine learning that we have learned along the way as to what makes a quality hire. The thing that, as we've gone through this, that I find fascinating is that it's not necessarily one particular variable that makes a difference in terms of whether a candidate will be a great employee. It's a combination of several variables. And in some cases, it's combinations that you would automatically think of. In other cases, it's combinations of variables that aren't quite as obvious. But when you think through it at a more critical level, you see that, yeah, I can see why that would make a difference in the performance. So it's a fascinating way to assess candidates. You can also, because it's machine learning, you can assess all of the candidates. If you get hundreds of candidates, you've assessed hundreds of candidates, not just the last 10 that came in, or not just the first 10 that came in. You're looking at every candidate. You're able to have a relationship with every candidate because you're actually looking at them to determine whether or not that would be a good fit. A quick word here about that, and that is that this is good for you as an employer because you are creating a process where you're going to hire a person who will stay on the job longer and perform better. But it's also better for the candidate. Nobody wants to apply for a job, get hired, not like it, and quit in 3 weeks, and you've spent a lot of time and effort in hiring that person, training that person, you're onboarding that person, and in 3 weeks they're gone, and we start the process all over again. That's very bad for your business. It's also bad for the candidate because they have entered into a relationship with you that didn't work out. And we want to find those candidates that are going to engage with you and be in your organization for a long period of time, be very productive, and also find it rewarding that you are working together and you have this partnership as employer and employee. So with the system, if you can identify your top candidates, bring them back to the hiring manager who's busy anyway. The hiring manager at a local store, a local factory, a local hospital, whatever it is, they have a lot of responsibilities. They have a lot of different things on their plate, keeping customers satisfied, working with suppliers, dealing with employee issues. Hiring people is one of those responsibilities, but it's one that's difficult for the manager to find the appropriate amount of time to deal with it. So the hiring manager can make the final decision, but we have assisted in a way that presents a lot of good candidates. And over time, what that means is your turnover is going to be reduced, your workforce is going to become more productive, and you have less time that has to be spent on the hiring process, which is all where we want to be. So just to kind of wrap this up, how data-driven decisions help. Think of it this way. The machine or the person making the hiring recommendations, they can only be influenced by the information that they have. The machine doesn't have data on age, on race, on gender. We don't give it that information. So the machine cannot make a decision on that. The person should not make a decision based on that information either, but it's more difficult for a person to bifurcate and say, look, I'm not going to use that information in my evaluation and my recommendation. So to the machine, information means data. We can only process in the machine what we have. We can create an environment that is much less, you can't ever completely eliminate bias, but we can manage it much, much better through a process such as that. The other thing I think is wonderful about this is that you can do it in a very transparent way. As we work with our clients, we tell them, look, these are the variables that we're evaluating. The decisions, the recommendations that we're making, they're based on these 20 variables or these 30 variables or these 15 variables. This is it. These are all the factors that we're looking at, and you can see for yourself that it's not biased through gender, it's not biased through age or any other factors like that. And there might be an area that you are concerned about or that you want to talk more about. Maybe you use location of the residence of the candidate versus the location of your store, and that's a factor in whether that person is going to be a good employee. And let's face it, if it's an hourly employee and you're paying $12 an hour, that person is not going to drive 50 miles to and from that job. They might do it for a while, but they're going to find something closer to where they live. Now, maybe they intend to move closer to your store. That might be an exception, but generally speaking, it has to be a reasonable commute distance for that person to really be engaged in that job and have the opportunity to become a quality hire. However, you might look at it and say, well, look, the people that we're pulling from, the candidates that we're pulling from that are within 5 miles of our store tend to be all of one ethnic group. And that's not what we want as an organization. We want a more diverse group than that. So we're going to not use that as a variable, or we're going to put a much lower weight on that because I want to draw from other areas of the city or the region or whatever it is. So the beauty of transparency is that whatever it is, whatever you want in your workforce, however you want your workforce to be constituted, you obviously want a quality workforce, but you also want a diverse workforce. So you can use tools such as this to make sure that you can accomplish both of those objectives. You can also, after the fact, by making these data-driven decisions, by using data, after the fact, you can reintroduce or introduce for the first time some of this data that you may be concerned about. Are we discriminating against a particular gender or a particular race? Well, let's introduce that factor into the engine to see, are we recommending a disproportionate number of one gender or one race, or is the model working the way we want it to work, or is there some bias in it? If there is, then we've got to fix that. You can't really tell that if you just look at the human decisions that your local managers make. You're going to get that after the fact. If you're subject to affirmative action, compliance with affirmative action or something like that, you're going to get that after the fact, but you can be more proactive about it by using these data-driven decisions. So I hope that was informative and helpful. Thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure for me to be able to speak with you today. If you have any questions, you see my email on the screen. It's jim.buchanan@cadienttalent.com. We are investing a tremendous amount of our company resources into this area, and the reason that we're doing it is because we believe it creates value for companies such as yourselves that are on this call today. And I've been in this business for a long time in talent acquisition, And I've always believed that hiring the right person in the first place is the best thing you can do for your business. That's the best return on investment that you can get. You may hire somebody, they're not particularly performing the way that you want them to perform. You can invest in performance management and training and things that are going to help that employee and help your business overall. But I think it's better to hire the right person from the start, then we're going to invest in that person, but we really have we have a good starting point with that person. So again, thank you very much. Please don't hesitate to contact me if you have a question or a comment. I would also love it if you disagree with something that I'm talking about here. I'd love to hear your opinion on it. So don't hesitate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's such an important topic for us. In general, always, our audience has always been looking to improve hiring practices, but especially right now where we're relying more and more on technology, but also trying to create equitable workplaces. So thank you so much for a great presentation. If you'd like to connect with Jim, of course, please reach out via email, as he just mentioned. You can also drop a question in the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen. Jim's and all of our other speakers' LinkedIn information is also connected on the speaker widget to the right of your screen. Next up, we're going to talk a little bit about employee experience and retention, and then we're going to continue talking about the future of work and the role of technology. Thank you so much. Stay tuned.
Thank you.